Hey, it's Jess, and welcome to Becoming Heartstrong. I'm a social entrepreneur, speaker, mother, and business owner, and I'm here because I believe in you, and I want you to live your full potential. My mission with this podcast is simple: to offer you perspectives, tools, and inspiration to help you live with more courage, rebuild after setbacks, and strengthen yourself from the inside out. So each week, I talk to thought leaders, authors, experts, and everyday amazing people who share their stories and outlooks that help you get from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. Let's get started. Do you ever feel like you have something great inside of you, but you just aren't sure how to bring it to life? Do you ever need some clarity on how to get from where you are to where you want to be? I'm so excited to share a free guide I created just for you. This tool has helped me in my own times of struggle and doubt. It's called Your Future Self Guide. This mini course includes a future self visualization I recorded, a series of journal questions, and some insights from me about overcoming self-doubt and embracing self-leadership. You can download it for free at jessicalindberg.com/futureself. That's jessicalindberg.com/futureself. Let's get back to the show. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. On today's episode, I am sitting down with Ethan Getchell. Ethan is a speaker, an author, and a men's mental health advocate, pursuing his master's in social work at the University of Michigan. He currently works at Michigan Medicine Psychiatry as a social work intern. Ethan earned his bachelor's in business and communication from Hope College in 2023, and he pivoted from his plans to go into commercial real estate into social work after the tragic loss of his 16-year-old brother Austin to suicide. Ethan wrote about this experience and the silent suffering that men go through in his book, Things in My Pocket, which is available on Amazon. And he also created a free course that is an introduction to men's mental health. And as you listen to this conversation today, I know you're going to be super inspired by Ethan and what he's creating and how he has pivoted his life to answer some big life questions for himself. But I want you to also observe that he is like you in the sense that we all go through challenges. We all go through hard things. And we have this pivotal point in our life when we need to answer the question, so what am I going to do now? And it's very easy to get stuck in our stories, to get stuck in the identity of the challenge that happened to us. And it's also possible for us to use it as fuel for something that we are called to do, uniquely called to do because of our experience in this world. And so that's what I hope you'll think about as you listen to Ethan today. The other reason I wanted to ask him on the podcast is I think I'm very interested in his topic of men's mental health. I am a mom to boys. I have brothers. And I think in our culture that men's mental health is very important. It's something that we need to pay attention to. I think we've given a lot of, and duly so, attention to women and all their needs in our culture. And I think we need to continue to do that. It's not one or the other. But I think that there has been a missing link of focusing on men and young men and how they navigate culture today. And so I'm really excited to get Ethan's take on that. So Ethan, welcome to the podcast.
Jessica, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited for people to learn from you, and I'm excited to learn from you today. And so I kind of want to start where this all started, and was wondering if you could share a little bit of your story about how you got here today, including your brother Austin, because he's really kind of a big part of how you got to the space that you're in today.
Yeah, well, this is very timely because I actually just moved back home. My lease ended in Ann Arbor, so as I finish up my master's, I'm commuting in from Portland. And just being back home, it brings up a lot of the memories of when I lost my brother and even before that in high school and being raised in a small town. Because, like you said, I feel very much like everyone else. And uh, uh, a lot of the people in Portland who resonate with this story are people that are just like me. So a bit of that story. In 2022, it was my junior year of college, and my brother was 16. He was on the tennis team. He had a car. he had a cat. And so it was really the first time that I was exposed to the silent suffering that boys and men go through. And it was a Monday afternoon. I had actually just gotten home from a missions trip. And so I so drastically went from this really high to this low, the lowest I've ever been. Um, and it was my family calling me, telling me that Austin had died and he had killed himself. And uh, the experience was overwhelming. It's something that you you can't really understand until you go through. And I tell people that, you're kind of thrown into this community of grievers, and it's this community that understands what I went through the most. And it's this community that is doing things and making change and producing hope out of the pain that they went through. And so I just really want to be like those people.
Mm, yeah. I think you don't know those people are there. At least I didn't know through I had my own experience, and I think there is this undercurrent of incredible human beings in this world is crazy and as divided as our world is right now. There is this foundation of people who are doing really beautiful things, who really do have a deep desire to create change that makes a difference in the lives of people, and it's born out of our pain and out of our grief. And I'm wondering, could you tell us just a little bit about Austin? I know you talked about his tennis team and his car. Like, what was he like as a brother? I know you're the oldest in your family. What was it like to be his brother?
Yeah, so we were all 2 years apart. So I have a younger brother, Hayden, who is about to be 21. His birthday is August 30th. And so I'm 23, he's 21. Austin was 16. So when he passed, Hayden was 18 and I was 20. Um, and we were all really close. I would say that Hayden and I were more similar to each other in like activities and hobbies. But all three of us were very similar in like personalities. We were all very witty. Austin was very witty, sarcastic. I think he learned it from being around older people his whole life. Like we would, I don't know, give him a hard time. We would joke with each other, and he'd be so quick. He would return it so fast. And so he was a reader. He loved reading books, playing video games. He played video games with his friends, and so I think all of those things, like we always said that he was the most intelligent brother. Like he was very smart. And he wasn't really at an age where he knew what he wanted to do career wise. He was just 16, but he it was at the point where he could really be anything. He was throwing around ideas of like, do I go into business, engineering? Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be a pilot? Like he really could have gone in any of those directions because he was smart, he was capable. When he was 2, he was diagnosed with bacterial meningitis. So he got really sick and he lost some of his hearing. So he lost 80% in his right ear and 20% in his left ear. And eventually he got a cochlear implant. So he was back to 80% in both ears with the cochlear and the hearing aid. Um, but that was really hard as a family to go through. And he never really expressed difficulties with the hearing loss. I think it was something that he kind of was just used to growing up. But I imagine that it was difficult for him. And there were times when it was really hard. I'm sure people gave him a hard time. I'm sure he got frustrated with that disability. Um, but like I said, he never really expressed it. He was always pretty happy and had a perspective of gratitude. And so I think there was a season towards the end that we started to notice that he was just very melancholic. Like he was more introverted, found that he was kind of isolating himself more. I was in college, so I wasn't seeing him day to day. But when I did go home to visit, I noticed that like he was spending a lot of time in his room or playing video games, and there was just like this little voice in the back of my head that was like, "Go check on him. Go like have a conversation with him. Go play video games with him. Just go be with him." And I didn't always listen to that voice. I would just do my thing, continue my routine, and I was always like, I can do it later, or when once he's older, we'll kind of connect and we'll be closer. And I really don't have any regrets, but that's one of the pieces that I try to be intentional about with other people to really maximize what you have right now in the present. And I find that when I have these little voices in the back of my head today, I'm much more active on them. I'll go and sit with my mom or have a conversation with my dad or just go be with my brother. And I think it's because of Austin and his legacy.
Do you think that's your intuition, learning to listen to that?
Absolutely. I think it's intuition. I think it's the older brother in me. I think it's the my consciousness of trying to be more empathetic. Uh, and it's something that has just come with maturity. I think you have to be taught that, or you have to experience something hard to recognize that, because it is something that's really easy to ignore.
Hmm. I agree. I think that is something that, grief is one of those things that asks us to examine a lot. And I think some people dive into it and some people resist it for a time. Um, but I mean, in my life, I think it's been my greatest teacher and my most difficult teacher.
Mm,
Um, and I think that it continues to be. I don't think when after my son died, I remember a social worker telling me, it was like a pediatric social worker, because I had young boys at the time and I was trying to figure out how to navigate it myself. But then what do I do with these young children and how do I talk to them about this? I remember she said to me, she said, at every developmental stage that your kids go through, that your boys go through, they will have to understand death again and why their brother isn't here. And you'll have to sort of readdress this. And I remember thinking how daunting that felt at the time. But I think it's like akin to even as an adult going through it, because it's like there's all these layers that we get invited to peel back. And I think that it's actually a good thing and it's actually made me a better version of myself. And so I'm wondering for you, so far as you've walked through grief, like what are you learning and maybe what practices are helping you?
mm. Yeah, I agree. I found that grief makes you exponentially the person that you were before. At least that's what I've kind of noticed in my family. My dad's really leaned into his work. My mom's really leaned into her friend group. My brother really leans into like caring about like himself and his health holistically. And for me, it gave me the ability to pivot into social work and to do something that I'm really passionate about, um, even if it wasn't on my radar or it wasn't something that was like societally pushing me towards. Because I feel like the loudest voice was like go into business, go make a lot of money. Um, but because of what I went through, I was able to kind of live more presently and based on my values and be like, no, this is what I care about. I don't really care what the stereotype is or what other people want me to do. And so in that journey through grief, I think one of the biggest things that I've really leaned into is this idea of listening and this idea of vulnerability. I'm kind of trying to make a career out of it as a counselor, but I've found that it's something that I've always had in me. I've always been a good listener, or I try to be. It was something that I wanted to be. And it's something that as I sit through sessions, I just see the power and the ability to like listen well. And it's something that as I do it and I practice it, I just observe how people are losing that. Like so often when I just like observe conflicts or friends tell me things or family members tell me things, it's a disconnect in like listening to each other and communicating well. And so I have my bachelor's degree in business and communication, and that communication piece is something that has carried through. It's a skill that I brought with me into social work and into counseling that I'm really curious about, and I'm really passionate about growing in myself too.
Hmm. I think you're right. I think that, in our culture right now, like if we could all be a 10% better listener, things might be a bit better. Do you think that that idea of being a better listener has helped you also listen to yourself better?
Absolutely. I think that's where it had to start. I think before I was a good listener, a good counselor, etc., I started journaling. So I've had a very strong habit of journaling for the last 2 years. I've already finished one notebook. I'm on my second notebook. And although journaling is like writing and it's kind of an active process, it in itself is a process of listening to yourself because you're taking these abstract ideas, these messy concepts, these gray things, and you're taking them down to a concrete level. You're putting words to these ideas, and it creates a lot of clarity. And so you have to listen to the thoughts that are going through your mind in order to journal. And so, in that practice of journaling, I have listened to myself. I've learned a lot, and it's helped me process and grieve. My last note on that is I was able to share some of that journaling in my book. The last chapter, I share a journal letter to Austin, and I share it as a template, as an example of what journaling can look like, what grieving can look like. And I've had so many people react quite emotionally, like crying after they read chapter 10 of my book, and they're like, I'm so grateful that you shared that. And so I was very nervous to share something like that, be very vulnerable, but the feedback has just been amazing.
Such a testament to how when we do our personal work and then we're able to vulnerably share that with others, how that, what a gift that is to other people. I'm wondering if you would share with us, what is it like to have a sibling die? Like, what is it? I know what it's like to have a child die, but I don't know what it's like to have a sibling. And my boys are somewhat, I'd say, too young in the sense of articulating that. And so as a mother, I'm curious, like, how does that reorient your life or your family, or just what does it feel like in yourself and in your life?
Well, you bring up an interesting point with like having to revisit that grief at every stage. Because although I'm an adult, I still very much feel like a kid. I feel like I have so many things that I'm still stepping into. Like I think about getting married, and Austin was going to be a groomsman. Like I fully imagined him. I didn't really think about getting married a lot growing up, but it was always like I knew Hayden and Austin were going to be in that line. But now him not being there, like re-pulls up that grief for me, and like really makes evident that hole in our family. And like when I think about having a family down the road, having kids, and having to explain that they have an uncle that they'll never meet. Um, and my brother and I got matching tattoos on the back of our shoulder with Austin's signature on it. And so people have asked me about it, and it's been a great conversation starter. But like my kids will do the same thing. They'll see that, they'll ask, and it'll force me to explain that. And so thinking about that already, um, again, it re-brings up that grief, and it identifies that hole in our family. And that's something that, it's only been 2 years now. Our family's still trying to figure out what it means to be a family again. I think it's been challenging for us when we get back together because we're all in different places. My brother's in undergrad. I'm working on my master's. My mom's at home. My dad's at work. And so we're kind of able to distract ourselves, and we're kind of able to grieve independently. And so when we come back together, that's when we really see the whole, like there's a person not here. And so that makes it really hard. And we have to navigate, how are we going to grieve? How are we going to make space for each other? My mom tends to cry more than the three boys in the house. And so, how do we make space and validate her experience? And then, how do we also acknowledge that, the guys in the house are sad? We may not cry, but how do we still bring that up? And a small example was, just last weekend, my family drove to get ice cream, and afterwards, I was driving, and so I stopped us at the high school where we have like this plaque on the tennis court with Austin's face and name because he was on the tennis team, and so they made a little memorial for him. And so just while we were eating ice cream, it kind of hit me like Austin would have been there, our family getting ice cream. And so we went and we saw the memorial, and we just thought about Austin. We cracked some jokes, and we got sad. And so there's no right way, but specifically as a brother, I think one of the challenges of the grief is that I find myself treating my grief as less than my parents, because I do think that there's nothing harder than losing a child. And I'm able to kind of understand their experience. And it's hard when you are empathetic, because you almost, it's not that you discount your experience, but you just put much more gravity onto their experience. Like, yeah, I don't know how you guys are doing. I couldn't imagine that. Even though I am grieving and I lost a brother, like there is this weird difference of I have a future. I haven't started a family. There's a lot of things that I'm more hopeful for, where I understand that they can see this as like they established their life and their family and they lost something that they're not going to replace. And so I have to catch myself not comparing grief and not saying that, oh, my grief's invalid because I think it's harder for my parents. And so that's something that I have to acknowledge in myself, and it's really helpful to have my brother to empathize and share grief with, because we are the ones going through the same thing. So it is different. It's not less, and it just acknowledges that there's a hole that will kind of always be there.
It's kind of learning to do, like my husband always says, I'm happy and I'm sad.
Mm,
I'm happy and I'm sad. And I think, we live in such a binary world where things are good or bad or right or left or this or that. And most things are more straight down the middle, and we just don't really want to be honest about that, I think, in general. But I think that is something that, and I agree with you. I first want to say, like, I agree. I think it's important to acknowledge everyone's grief is individual, and yet it's collective. I mean, it's both of those things. And you're right. You do have so much to look forward to in your life. And that is different than parents who kind of have this family that's sitting in front of them and somebody's not there. Um, but I think it's just different experiences of the same. And so one isn't worse or better than the other, easier or harder than the other. It's like both. And
mhm.
it's like learning sort of to walk, I would say, like down that balance beam. And we all experience that in a different way. But I think it's really important that you're acknowledging the gravity of your own too. And when you are an empathetic person, it is easy to sort of push that off. So
Mm.
I can see that that is a challenge. What has surprised you most about grief? I'm sure like none of us really anticipate these sorts of situations in our life, but many of us find ourselves here. So is there something that's like surprised you about this experience?
I would say the thing that surprised me most is how much I've been able to handle it. And that's what I would tell just about anybody. You never think that you can. Like, I couldn't imagine losing my partner. I couldn't imagine losing a kid. I couldn't imagine losing whoever. And of course you don't. And you never want that to happen. And I fully hope that doesn't ever happen. But when it does, you just have to take it one day at a time, and it starts with like a minute or an hour, and then it becomes a day, and then it becomes a week, and then over time you're like, I'm having moments of joy again, and I'm feeling happy again. I never thought I would feel that again. You never become the person you were before that grief, but you become a new person, and you're able to recognize the gifts that that grief has given you, and you don't really understand that, and that almost seems like contradictory, like that doesn't make any sense until you're going through it, and then you see it, and you're sitting with people, and I'm writing a book and I'm getting reactions and people are messaging me, and I'm like, all of this has come out of Austin passing away. I would do anything to have him back, but I'm also grateful for the good that has come out of it. So that's something that really surprised me, and it's something that I want to help other people see, because people become overwhelmed by grief, or they couldn't imagine, or they think I would be done, I would be a mess if something happened. And I'm like, I get it. I'm right there with you. But then when that actually happens, having someone to walk with and just like sit in the mud with you, it shows you that you can get through it.
Mm-hmm. I always have this saying that I say, I wouldn't I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I wouldn't trade it.
Mm,
And it's a weird statement. Sometimes people are like, really? And it's true. It's like I wouldn't wish for it, but having it can't change it. I wouldn't trade it because I see all the goodness that has come. And that's obviously a choice that we all have to make. But I think what you said about that you're doing it, that you're able to do it, I think that's such a powerful statement that I just want to say again to people, because I believe the same thing. I think our human capacity is great. And I was talking to my son the other day. We were talking about actually this interview and about young men and feelings and all of this stuff. And we were kind of saying that, this human experience really just isn't about, we're not just here for joy. Like, we're here for the full human experience. And that includes sadness and loss and regret. It also includes joy and love and excitement. And to have the full experience of being human is to embrace all of those things. And so I love that you're saying that, because I think that's such an important message for a person listening right now who might be in a really low spot.
Mhm.
Do you ever feel your brother with you? Do you ever feel like his energy or spirit is with you?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. I was someone who like didn't really acknowledge the beauty of like a sunset. I was always like, yeah, whatever. There'll be another one tomorrow. Like I went to college in Holland, Michigan. Went to Hope College, and we would go to the state park. And you'd have a sunset like almost every night. So I almost became like numb to them. I was like, oh yeah, sunset, whatever. I see them all the time. Where other people are like, oh my goodness, I love the sunset. But then after Austin passed, like he was a redhead, and so that orange sun, that sunset, like especially the first year after he passed and I was still at Hope, I would go to the beach and I would just watch the sunset and I would just cry. And the sunset became a really strong association like through Austin. And so there are times when I'll be doing other things and I won't really be like intentionally seeking the sunset, but then I'll see it and it'll just like overwhelm me, or other orange things because he had orange hair. Like there's that association with orange things. For my mom, it's like an orange butterfly. She'll see an orange butterfly now and then, and it'll remind her of her. And so I think that association is very strong, especially when like things are going on. I'll just get like that glimpse of orange or that sunset and be like, okay, everything's gonna be okay. Like Austin's still there. He's watching over me. It's really special for me.
Mm, I love that. I think it's important to find those connections, to the transcendent. We have a mutual friend, Leslie Wyrick, which is actually how I met you. And her episode isn't live yet as we record this, but she's an amazing guest. And she says something that I heard you say on a podcast, but I've heard her say as well, is that either you can get stuck on your story or you can stand on your story, which I love that. Like when I heard her say that, I got like the chills. I was like, yes. What does it mean to you to stand on the story that you have?
Well, Leslie has become such a mentor for me in this space, especially someone who is doing incredible work on large audiences. She has a huge platform on LinkedIn, and she's really taken me under her wing and learned about what I want to do. And we've just created this really beautiful relationship. And I read her book. She has this book, The Gifts of Grief. And in her book, she talks about the nurse log. And the nurse log is like a tree that has fallen over and is dead, but it's all of the nature that and life that has grown out of that log. So it's the mushrooms and the moss and the etc. And to me, that's what it means to stand on your story, is to recognize all of the flowers in the life that are growing out of that grief and that loss. Um, and so for me, it's a bit more clear with the book and the speaking engagements. And I think I kind of take it to an extreme level. But I think for anybody, the day to day, like your empathy, your ability to understand someone, to listen, to feel the pain that someone's going through, who's suffering, to the grief that someone's going through, who's lost somebody, like just that skill and that gift, that empathy that you get, um, is part of the gifts of grief, and it's how you can stand on your story.
I want to talk about men's mental health to kind of switch into that, because I know that that's something that you're really passionate about and that's really your platform. And I know that you decided to pivot from commercial real estate, I believe, into what you're doing now. I thought that was a really interesting like idea or concept, because if you think about men, commercial real estate is like, if you're a young man, you would get, I mean, I'd be like, oh, that's amazing. Oh, you're going to be so successful. It's such a default thing that we would want any young man to go into, or um, any, potential spouse would be like, oh, he's in commercial real estate. And so I would love to just peel that curtain back a little bit and take
Hmm.
us into that switch that you make, which I actually think was a very courageous one, and how you made that decision, and just what that story is about. Because what I'm trying to get to is, and you said this before, you said I was always kind of this person. And I think that there are so many people, especially young people out there, who have this like thing inside of them that is them. And
Hmm.
one of the gifts of Austin was that he sort of like, catapulted you over here, right? Maybe you would have gotten here someday, maybe you would not have. That's a gift of Austin, I think. But I'd love for you to share that story, and then just talk to young people, or people, who are kind of in that throes of making those choices, or even older people who are dying to change their career. How did you listen to that voice and kind of have the courage to make that change?
Yeah, I've I've really had to put my ego aside, because you're right. Like when you tell people as a young man, oh yeah, I'm going into commercial real estate, there's almost like a status that's associated with that. Like, oh yeah, you're gonna make a lot of money. Like that's really good. And then to pivot and go into social work, and then now be meeting new people and extended family and friends, and be like, oh yeah, I'm a social worker. And then like I get eyes. It's like, what? And then it's like, how are you gonna raise a family? How are you gonna make money? Like, there's just all the stereotypes that are associated with it. And I can almost throw the business terminology back at the business people, and say, with the idea of scarcity, there are so many young men in commercial real estate, and there are very few men in social work and in healed fields. So with this idea of scarcity, it almost makes more sense for me to go where the men are not. Um, so and so with that, so one of the funny stats is, in my social work department, there's like 300 people in the program. There's only like 10 guys. And so it has been a journey to like put that aside and put those insecurities at bay, because I am so founded on my passions, and I know what I'm doing. I think if I were just doing it because, it would be a lot harder. But because I know why, it's easier for me to continue down that path. And so I think understanding my why is really important. And the other piece is surrounding myself with really good people, and people that know me really well. I always tell this story, but one of the seeds to me pivoting was a mentor. That he was my professor freshman year. He became my advisor for like 3 years out of college. We were meeting weekly my freshman year, and then we were meeting up to like monthly through my junior year. And I hadn't seen him for about a year. And when I saw him, he like knows my personality. He kind of knows I'm always scheming. I still have a very business entrepreneurial mind. And so when I saw him, and I told him that I was thinking about going into commercial real estate after I graduate, and this was February of my senior year, he's like, "What's your crazy idea? Like, what's the thing in the back of your mind that you're not talking about?" And I was like, just with my grieving process and going into therapy, and loving that experience, and seeing a need for young men, and for like men like me, boys like me, I was like, I would love to go be a counselor and really target young men. But to me, it felt like it was too late. Like, I'm graduating in 2 months. I have to have a job. And he's like, do it. You're so young. And so, him giving me that freedom, and then my family giving me that freedom. Like, when I had that conversation with them, they're like, yeah, we'll support you. We love that idea. And so, my friends supporting that idea, my family supporting that idea, gave me a really good platform. It gave me confidence to make that pivot. And so it's knowing my why, having my North Star, having the people around me to support me. All of those have really helped me listen to that voice that's deep down, and really block out the voices that don't matter to me. The voices that say you need to make a certain amount of money, or you won't make that certain amount of money if you don't do this path. And that negativity is really easy to cancel out when you know where you're going and you have good people with you.
And I think we all need someone to ask us that question, like that professor, like, what's the crazy idea? I love that. I love asking myself that question actually. And I'm always like one with these crazy ideas. And people are like, oh gosh, but I
Hmm.
think those are the questions that we should be asking ourselves. And I actually think that I wasn't that person before my son died or before I've gone through things. It's like it's produced in me sort of that kind of a like, well, why not? And I think that that's like also one of the gifts of grief is that you kind of do see life in a different way. And hey there, it's Jess, and we're taking a brief pause to highlight this show's sponsor, the Heartstrong Collective. It's more than just a nonprofit, it's a social movement I founded to inspire people worldwide to embody resilience and grow through challenges. Through the Heartstrong Collective, we're dedicated to empowering caregiving families, investing in the next generation, and leaving the world just a little bit better than we found it. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com. Okay, I'll do one more time just because, and then we'll be done. Hey there, it's Jess, and we're taking a brief pause to highlight this show's sponsor, the Heartstrong Collective. It's more than just a nonprofit, it's a social movement I founded to inspire people worldwide to embody resilience and grow through challenges. Through the Heartstrong Collective, we're dedicated to empowering caregiving families, investing in the next generation, and leaving the world just a little bit better than we found it. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com. I'm going to say that last paragraph again because I think I didn't say it as well as I'd like to. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com. So I'm wondering, like, now that you're kind of down this path and you're thinking through men's mental health, like, what are some mentalities that men have or that our culture gives to them? We kind of touched on that with the commercial real estate thing that you think need to be addressed and changed. Like, are there specific things that you're like, ooh, this is toxic. We need to address this. I'm concerned about other young men with going with these mentalities that we have in our culture, these expectations, however you want to categorize them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say like my journey, it started with mental health, and that was about the only idea I had. And then it was, okay, men's mental health, and what does that look like? And then it really got me into this digging into research on like gender and equity and like efforts that are being made. And the thought leader in the space is definitely Richard Reeves. And I read his book of Boys and Men, and I would highly recommend it. He's an economist, so he takes a very statistical approach on like the gender inequality and the gender conversation. So in reading that, it really gave me a lot of power and passion for the effort. One of the things he says is you can be passionate about women's rights and compassionate about the struggles of boys and men. And there's so much evidence that boys and men are struggling today. And even outside of his evidence, in the circles that I'm a part of, in my anecdotal experience, like boys and men want it. I can tell that there's a desire to be more emotional, to be passionate, to not be a robot and not be so industrial. My brother is just finishing up an internship in construction, and there's a generation like he's the youngest one, and they're older guys, they're middle aged older guys, and there's just such a difference in like their desires. Like it's less of an emphasis on how can I make the most money and how can I be an alpha male and how can I dominate a room, and it's like how can I understand people and how can I learn empathy and be a good listener. And so at least in the circles I run in and the people I talk to, like I can just feel that boys and men want it, but they don't know where to go or how to get that. And the last piece is they don't want to be the first one to do it. Like it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be vulnerable. It's uncomfortable to sit with a group of guys and be like, I'm not doing well, or to cry. Like that's unimaginable. Um, so for me, as kind of an extroverted person, my parents inspired a lot of confidence in me that I'm really grateful for. But I'm able to take those pieces and just be the volunteer in that space and to be uh, vulnerable. And like an example of that was I did a May term in Alaska. And this was May after my brother passed away in March. So it was only like 2 months later. But we're sitting around a fire the first night, and the advisors later reflected on how the first night they don't really get involved. They let the conversation just be like surface level and people getting to know each other. But I brought up the idea. I'm like, what if we go around and we talk about something that's not on your resume? Um, it's something that I had read in a book. It's like you go around, you say something that's on your resume. It's something that you like about yourself. But what's something that isn't on your resume that you wouldn't just bring up in conversation? And people are kind of hesitant. They're like, I don't know how deep to go. I don't know what to share. And I was like, I'll go first. I wear this bracelet because my youngest brother passed away to suicide 2 months ago. And like you could just feel the whole room shift. And all of a sudden, everyone's being vulnerable. Like people are crying. And this is the first night of this 2 week trip. And again, the advisors reflected that it was one of the best trips that they've been on because the group was so close to each other. And the reason we became so close is because we leaned into vulnerability and we went deeper than the surface level accomplishments. How are we better than each other? And so I just say that for like the boys and the men that are scared to be the first ones or to be emotional. There are different expectations in groups, in relationships, and sometimes it feels like there's pressure for the guy to lead in relationships and in groups. But I would say like if you're gonna lead, you have to lead from a place of vulnerability, not from a place of I'm the strongest and I'm perfect and I have it all together. Because that's just gonna run you ragged and it's gonna lead you down a bad path. But if you are leading and you lead from a place of vulnerability, it's just going to take you to a deeper level and bring you much more fulfillment.
Do you think that being a man who leads from vulnerability, but also is strong? Because I think our culture also needs strong men, right? We need both of those things. I was fortunate. I grew up in a house. My dad was a teacher. Has 5 sisters. He had 3 daughters first. So he's was a theology teacher, a high school theology teacher, and so he had that the faith component of him. But he was also a college football player, and he. So I grew up in a home where I felt like I had a male role model who leaned into both sides of those things. Like he loved to work out, and he's very competitive, and he still loves football. I watched football, the Cleveland Browns. I grew up in Ohio every Sunday with him, but he also had the softer side of himself. And I admire my dad a lot. And so I think that is like, I think we need more men like that in our culture because both of those things are important. And so how do you think our culture would change if we had, I mean, I would almost say that's like a real man, but that's what I would say. Like, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, so I had mentioned Richard Reeves, another thought leader that I really admire is Scott Galloway.
I know
And
who he is. Yeah.
he was on a podcast, and one of the things he was saying, he's like, if you go to the bar, who's the softest guy at the bar? And it's the biggest, strongest guy because he's confident in himself. And like, sure, he knows that he could eat you in a second's notice, but he's not because he has this sense of confidence. And so I think that's where the strength piece is really important. It's not strength so that you can dominate someone else. It's strength so that you can care for people and you can take care of yourself. And it's the people that aren't taking care of themselves that are more dangerous at the bar. It's the people that are insecure that are more dangerous. It's the ones that are gonna bite back or are gonna say something or gonna cause a fight. And it's the big strong guys that are gonna be the softies and telling jokes, and they're the ones that are gonna give you a hug and stop the fighting. So I think that was just a really interesting example of what strength looks like and like how strength can be conceptualized for our culture. Because I think it is important to be strong. Like I still work out, I rock climb. People are surprised. Like I did an MMA fight and I wrestled in high school. And
Wow.
so it's not things that you would associate with like a social worker. And I let go of the MMA because for some reason I can't see myself punching people while also sitting in therapy sessions. So that seems a little contradictory in my mind. But I still have that piece of really prioritizing my physical health. on top of my mental health. And so I think some people feel like it's one or the other. It's like, oh, if I prioritize vulnerability and emotional intelligence and I prioritize my mental health, then I'm going to get weaker, or for some reason that's going to make me less of a man. Where you can go to the gym, you can rock climb, you can play sports, you can be competitive, and you can prioritize your mental health and be emotional. And in fact, that's only going to help you in the other. So,
Would you say that's healthy masculinity?
absolutely. I think there you see the examples on social media, especially right now with the Olympics, highlighting the guys who win accomplishments and then like break down crying, or they lose and then they break down crying. And it's not the stoic person that's like going viral. It's the person that's like, oh my goodness, look at this person's emotional intelligence. Look how passionate they are. So, and these are people that are at the pinnacle of physical level, physical strength. And so I think that idea of healthy masculinity definitely is about taking care of yourself holistically. I think when you neglect yourself intentionally or unintentionally, that's not taking care of yourself, that's not upholding your responsibilities, and that to me is more immature masculinity. There's another interesting conversation around like this idea of toxic masculinity. It's like what is the benefit of saying toxic masculinity? Like I think a lot of people see that and it's distasteful, or it doesn't inspire good conversation. It's more used as like an insult. And it was at oh I remember it was Richard Reeves on Diary of a CEO podcast, and he was saying that instead of using toxic masculinity, he uses immature masculinity versus mature masculinity. And I think that perspective, when you say, "Hey, I think what you're acting on or like what you're showcasing is immature masculinity," I think that inspires more of a conversation of like, what does that look like to get to mature masculinity? um, and versus saying like that's you're being toxic. It's like, well, now you're attacking their character. Now they're going to get defensive, and you're not going to inspire any change. But if you say, hey, I think you could get to a place of more mature masculinity by doing X, Y, and Z, it inspires much more of a conversation.
I like that. I like that a lot. I'm curious what it's like to be a Gen Z man today in this culture. What are you noticing about your generation? I find generations very interesting. I think I had an interesting conversation with Nicole Runyon. She was on my podcast. We talked about generations and parenting and how we all parent different and why. And I'm just personally really interested in culture. And so I'm wondering, like, what does it feel like and what is the experience of being in Gen Z as a young man who is, finding his way? What are you noticing about your generation?
Well, I smile because like the first thing that comes to mind just when you ask that question, to me, it feels very doughy. Like it feels like Play-Doh. Yeah, it feels very malleable right now. And I think it's because I have been playing around with it a lot and still trying to figure it out. But I don't think unanimously, if you talk to Gen Z, especially if you talk to Gen Z men, I don't think any one person will tell you like there's a one fit all for our generation, our culture. And I think that, I can't really speak for other generations, but it feels like to me that it was much more defined in the past. It was much more industrial. It was much more like, here's the path. And either that's, you're going to be enlisted, you're going to go into the military, or you're going to get a factory job, or you're going to go into business. Like there was no leeway for you to chase your creativity or passion or do something outside of what was expected. And even if you did have that option, there was no way people were going to do that because there was just too much pressure. Like people were very structured. There was much more of a tight mold. And that's where I feel like, even with the millennial generation, I feel like the pendulum swung all the way back to the other way. Like there's much more, I, I don't know, I don't want to say rebellious, but there's like an emphasis to break away from that mold. And so you see much more creativity and people following their passions and doing crazy things. And so now I feel like Gen Z is at this place where it's very malleable. And I feel like we're looking at both extremes and we're saying like, we don't really want either of those. And it's like, how can we take the strengths of both of those and apply those to our life today? I think especially coming out of like COVID in the pandemic, like there was such a hard reset on like what life looks like, and we're able to see like the things that went wrong from our future generations and from the people that are older around us, and we're able to say, we don't like that, we do like that, and so we're able to kind of piecemeal what Gen Z looks like today. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how it feels to me.
No, that's an interesting reflection. I think that that makes a lot of sense. And I think your generation really has an opportunity to, like you said, look back, I'd say over the last 4 years, if you want to say through COVID, and say, what are the things that worked, what didn't work, and how are we sort of going to chart our own path? I know there's even different trends in parenting with different generations that I think, you know, even people are like letting their kids have less devices, and they're kind of looking back on things and doing it different. And that gives me a lot of hope. Honestly, I think there's sometimes we look at, people look at generations and they get concerned with like, oh, it's, this or I think that that your generation has a lot to offer and a lot of hope to offer our country and our culture just by the things that you're saying. And I think that I just encourage you to keep leading with that, because it's what our world needs. I think it desperately needs. I'm wondering, kind of as we get towards the end of the conversation, what's your message for parents? I mean, I have, kids that are teenagers or coaches as they're
Mhm.
working with young men, and as they're, navigating this tension, right, between winners and winning and the things that we all want to do, or success. Success looks like a lot of different things, but sometimes our culture, I think, defines it as accomplishments. What advice do you have for them on working with young men, and what questions might they ask them? What might they be aware of, especially in light of your brother? Because we all want to do a better job.
Yeah, starting very broad, generalized, I would say that it's less about what you say and more about what you do and how you make them feel. Um, this is really the first time in my life where I've stepped into like a coach or counseling role. Like I'm not a dad yet. I guess I've been an older brother, but even that, there was the safety net of my parents. But now when I step into these sessions, really early on, I felt like there was this pressure to say the right thing. When someone comes to me in crisis, it's like, oh, what am I going to say to like fix this? And I'm learning like that's not what counseling is. That's not what coaching is. Coaching more is about creating a space where they feel safe enough to discern, to talk about, to bring up things that they don't feel like they can share in public. And so when you create that safety and that trust, that's where all of the magic happens. That's where people aren't afraid to like ask questions or push back or be curious. And so if you create a sense of safety for your kids or for your clients, and you build that rapport, that will just allow you to explore what they're going through and have a lot of fruitful conversations. So I think that at a broad level, that's the environment that I would strive to create. And at a practical level, I think again, being that example as a parent or a coach, of not having this facade that you have it all together or that you're perfect, and not being worried that by sharing your vulnerabilities or your weaknesses that they're going to think less of you. I've never found that to be true, where when you share a struggle or your humanness with somebody, that they use that against you, especially in a family unit. I almost every time the family just respects you more, or they take it as a breath of fresh air. It's like, oh, finally, like you're opening up. Uh, so I would say just be open. I again I don't do this a lot. I'm speaking from the limited experience I have in counseling, but from what I have experienced anecdotally, it leading by example and creating that space. Um, is how you will start making change for young men today.
So one of the things that I try to tell my boys, I have a son who's really big into cross country, successfully so, and another younger son who plays a lot of basketball all over the place, club basketball, and that's like his thing. I always want to, and I'd love to run this by you, but I always tell them, it's not what you do. That's not why I love you. I don't love you because of your accomplishments. It's because of who you are. And it doesn't, and I want them to be successful. I want to push them to their highest potential, but I don't want them to think that they're loved because they went to state for cross country or because they were undefeated in their basketball season. Because I think there's so much focus on that, especially in the sports world still. I want them to know that they're valued just because they're a member of our family, just because of who they are. Like, is that the message we should be sending? Just truly asking you as I'm checking myself with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question to be asking. I think there are so many people in like your kids' lives that are going to be pushing them to be the best coaches, teammates, friends. Like they're going to have pressure when they walk out the door. I think the question is when they come home, how does it feel? How does the home feel? And at least for me, I hope that like when I have kids, when they come home, I hope what they feel is loved and accepted, and like that pressure that society just builds on you, that can kind of come off and they can unload that when they come home. So emphasizing that love, I think, is huge. And then when they have that foundation and they're being watered with love, then that's how they'll grow into the person that they're going to be. And that's when you can take the pressure from the coaches and the criticism, and you can use that for good without it really degrading who you are or falling into the dependency of needing love and approval from other people. I think there's just such an important role that the household creates and that parents have of loving kids and raising them well.
That's beautiful. I think it's tremendous advice, and I thank you for that. So before I ask, I have two questions I ask all of my guests, which I'm going to ask you. But before I do that, I want you to tell people where they can find you, where they can find your book, and how they can invite you to speak if they're interested. So just tell us that, and we'll also link all these things in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn, and I have my links to everything else there. You can find my book on Amazon, Things in My Pocket. My downloadable free course is in LinkedIn, and also my website is in my LinkedIn. You can go to my website. Um, it's a Google site, and if you just Google Ethan Getchell, it'll come up, and from there you can all my contact information is there, and I'd be happy to talk about speaking on your podcast or coming to your group and doing any kind of speaking engagements. So.
Awesome. So I ask all of my guests these heartstrong questions, and I love that. Honestly, I don't think anyone's ever answered them the same. It's pretty cool. So my first question for you is, what is one belief or practice that has helped you get from where you were to where you are today?
Hmm. I would say holding on to hope. And that shows up in a lot of different forms on a practical level when I'm journaling about gratitude and the good things that are going on in life, and with the bad things that are going on too. But then at a broader level, with what you do and how you interact with people and in your job and the vocation that you're discerning, if it isn't pointing you to hope and you aren't seeing hope in it, then I think that's a really strong indicator for change. And so I think that's a really strong north star for me.
Can I ask you how you define hope?
I would define it as a combination of like love and joy. I think that the joy, I was going to say joy in itself, but it's in combination with love, and those two are not just a feeling but an action. And so you have to like give love to feel joy. And so I think in doing that, it creates hope, and you start to see the positivity and the good around you.
What is one thing that you love about yourself? So you can say, I love this about Ethan because of the hardships that you faced, something that has been born and built from adversity.
Hmm. I love my ability to create safe space for people through active listening, through reflecting. We kind of started with this in our conversation, so it feels very full circle, but I just love the space that therapy creates where it's mutually respected and you can bring up hard things, you can disagree, but you aren't going to be blown off and you aren't going to be misheard or not heard. I think in so much of our day to day life, people are talking and the person receiving it isn't listening. Um, and that can be really frustrating. So creating a space where people feel heard and really listening, people feel it as a breath of fresh air and they think it's some superpower. And I'm like, anybody can do this. It takes a little practice and intentionality, but it's not impossible.
I love that. Well, thank you, Ethan, for joining me on the podcast. You have a bright future and you're doing really good work in this world, and it's inspiring to me. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think your platform is incredible and I'm grateful to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Becoming Heartstrong. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and applicable to your life. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Before I go, this is just a quick reminder that I believe in you, and I believe that you too have the ability to become heartstrong. I'll chat with you soon.